This podcast is now a stomp.
This is now the stomp version of video game discussions.
Yes. Interpretive dance.
Ching 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 ching. That's my keys jingling.
Oh, I don't even know. For some reason, I decided to bring beatboxing into it, but I don't beatbox.
Well, I think you were beatboxing maybe on like trash cans.
Oh yeah, I had like the lids actually. I was like,
yeah, that's what I was hearing for sure.
Okay,
and then I'm gonna shh, and that's me with like a broom going down the street.
I love it.
And this is Geeks and Grounds.
We're ready for Broadway. We're taking this podcast live. Welcome to Geeks and Grounds, everyone, a monthly game club where we sit back and brew good conversation and play games together. And apparently also we're a musical now.
And we're a musical now.
Yes, we're bringing back, what is it? The musicals of the 90s. It wasn't even like, it's not even recent.
Officially a retro musical podcast.
Yeah. It is now. Pretty excited. We are deep diving into the game that we're playing this month, which is Mr. Saitou. But if you are not familiar with this game club, don't worry. You can still hop in, listen to the podcast, get lots of enjoyment from it. If you want to join us in the club, play along as we play the games together, visit geeksandgrounds.com because that's where you can sign up for the newsletter. You can find our social channels and really get all the details on how to participate alongside the podcast, because this is really supplementary as a part of a whole thing we do with newsletter, reflection questions, a Discord community, all the stuff.
Yeah, and you don't have to be involved with any of those things to listen to the podcast, but I definitely think it's a way for us to connect with the community, which is actually a really important theme of Mr. Saitou, the game we're discussing this week.
We do I feel, and again, no surprise because we're the ones curating it, but there's this very strong, affiliation, love in my heart for games that address and talk about community in different ways. And I think what Mr. Saitou does really well is talk about not just community in general, but also the quality of community. Which we'll get into. But before we do that, just for anyone who is listening to the podcast and doesn't know, could you describe Mr. Saitou?
Oh, no.
Give us the
I need to start preparing for this. Okay.
I always like to add, you are so much better at doing these summaries, which is why I always put you on the spot.
I also just finished the game this last week, so it's probably a bit fresher.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Mr. Saitou takes a Japanese businessman, what's the name of those types of workers?
Salaryman?
A salaryman, and takes him to a fantastical world where he partners up with a young boy named Brandon to rediscover the small moments in life that can really bring you joy. And through that process, discovers wonder that he hopefully brings back to the real world with him.
I love that. That's so nice. That sounds like a great game.
It was and it was very nice, and it is a great game. And also, just for those of you who are like, should I get into this? I think it took like 2.5 hours for me to play through it. Like, not a super long game.
Way faster than I did.
Oh, really? Oh
man, I feel like I took 3, almost 4 hours to play. But I also at the time, the first time I played, it was because I was reading out loud. The second time is because I really stared at stuff. I walked around everything and really appreciated lots of details. So I did take my time.
There really are so many little nuggets, little nugs packed into this game that it's like, oh, if you're looking at the posters in the background or whatever, there's definitely a whole nother layer of enjoyment you can get out of this.
Oh my gosh. And I'm a sucker. I love not just a sucker in general. I am a sucker in general, but specifically in this case, I'm a sucker for pixel art.
Absolutely.
And I really love this style of pixel art. We were talking a little earlier about in the last episode, we introed it with it's kind of anime feeling, and that's very much the vibe. It feels like, I don't know, 16 or 32-bit sort of Japanese RPG meets slice of life anime. It doesn't play like necessarily an RPG, but it just has this feeling to it that feels very nostalgic, which is interesting because this is a modern game. It was made just this past year.
Yeah, it definitely combines some of the like slice of life anime moments with some of the fantastical like Ghibli-esque like twists on the real world moments in a way that you feel like you're part of this cohesive like world building experience, I guess is maybe the way to frame it.
Yeah. God, the details were great. I think one of my favorite things is also pixel art food, kind of like with Ghibli, where it's like, okay, you know the scene in Howl's Moving Castle where they're making breakfast and the eggs are getting fried and the bacon is sizzling, and you look at that food and you're just like, oh my God, I have never seen a more magical plate of eggs and bacon. Like, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. I think the pixel art food in particular gives me that feeling, and Mr. Saitou captured that really well. So that was small detail I wanted to point out because it's one of those things that's like, it's not an aspect of the gameplay. You don't do anything with the food, but it just looks so cute and delicious.
Looks amazing.
It brought me a lot of joy.
I think, you know, you mentioned Howl's Moving Castle, and I think we started off by talking about like the most minute details of this game. At the highest levels, I actually think the themes of this game are more connected to Howl's Moving Castle than probably any other Ghibli movie that I can think of, where it's like, you know, in Howl's Moving Castle, you have Sophie, who is like really dedicated to working in the hat shop, and she like considers herself like an old lady who doesn't go out and have fun or experience the wonder of the world until she gets cursed to become this old lady and she meets a wizard and learns how to appreciate the magic of the world. This has kind of a very similar thematic structure to it, where you're the salaryman in Japan, and the opening, like the first like few minutes of the game, you're kind of watching a cinematic where it's like he lives kind of a sad, lonely life, and throughout the game he's going to experience a more wondrous existence and reconnect with that.
That's such a great connection. I didn't even make that until you mentioned it, and now I see it. I was like,
I thought that's why you brought it up.
Nope, I was just literally talking about food.
One more guy just stealing the ideas of women and claiming them as his own. God.
No, you helped expand upon the ideas. Very good. Very good. So let's, I guess, with this one, because this was such a narrative game, really different from some of the others we've played recently, I feel like it makes sense to kind of start at the beginning and walk through it a little bit, you know, and dive into the things that resonated as we played. I mean, you kicked it off already. We start with a salaryman who is living a really sad existence. And what's interesting is we talked about loneliness a little bit with Laura. There's a book, I will have to put it in the show notes because I'm forgetting what it's called, but it's about loneliness that I just finished. It's a kind of it's a comic that details loneliness and the research that this cartoonist has been doing on it, and how just as a world right now we're actually quite lonely. Like that is, you know, in the news you may hear about a loneliness epidemic, and that's something that is really prominent right now. So it felt really poignant to be playing a game about someone who felt very alone in the world, because you don't see, Mr. Saitou doesn't have friends. He doesn't seem to have family that's connected with him, and when he wakes up in the hospital, he's by himself.
Exactly.
Which is really sad, because you're like, if you had family or friends connected with you, you'd imagine they'd be at your bedside if you were in a big accident.
Oh man, I hadn't even drawn that connection, but I think you're absolutely correct. I think, and I want to just like say, like, when we talk about the intro being sad, or like his life being sad, we don't mean that in like a derogatory way, because his life is a lot like mine at points, where it's like dark night, him staring at like what appears to be an Excel sheet, and like the rest of the cubicles around him are empty, like him by himself on public transit despite being like surrounded by other people that are also making their way home. Beautiful views of like the mountain and cityscape that he seems like he's looking at through glass as he's on this like on the subway home. When we say sad, we just mean like it's sad from like a very emotional state that he's living this way.
Well, and it's kind of like, I don't know, it's one of those things where it's like, maybe in the moment itself you're not feeling sad, but when you're thinking about the entirety of like human existence and the ways we want to spend time in our lives, it is kind of like, do I want to spend my time commuting and at a computer and by myself? Maybe little bits of it, but not as a day-to-day repeated existence.
Yeah, exactly. And so to your point, like in the opening cinematic, we see him doing this work stuff. He appears to collapse on like at the subway station on the floor, and wakes up in the hospital, right?
Yep.
Which kind of kicks off the journey into the unknown, if you will.
Yes. And while we did just say he's alone, no family or friends, but he is actually not quite alone.
Not quite alone.
Because there is someone in the room with him, this little disembodied voice that
it's very like, hey, listen, like that kind of thing. Like there's this voice, he has no idea, Mr. Saitou, the character, has no idea where it's coming from. And the first thing that you do is essentially play hide and seek with this voice, try and figure out where is this coming from. And you're like searching throughout the hospital room. And when you click on what I believe is the trash can in the corner, that is when you meet kind of the entry point of chaos in the game. Lil Brandon.
The most precocious, adorable kid ever. Oh my gosh, I love Brandon.
Brandon is apparently in the hospital. And I was kind of struggling to understand between like, is he there for himself for something or there for his grandmother for something? And depending on how I was feeling, it seemed like I could read it either way. Did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I also was torn because also later on in the game, there is a conversation you have, and I can't remember if you have it with Brandon as well, but Buds, who is kind of the parallel character for Brandon in the fantasy world, says something about how there's something wrong with his insides. And so this kid, Brandon, I assumed, since they were mirroring each other as a fantasy reality pairing, this kid probably hangs out at the hospital because there's something wrong with his insides, and maybe also his grandmother or caretaker also works there.
Oh, that's interesting. So yeah, you meet this kid who like spends a lot of time in the hospital. He's like that. It's, I don't know, like a 90s cartoon character where he's just like always in this place.
Yes.
And the first thing that happens is like he starts kind of like playing with you a little bit.
Yeah. Mr. Saitou is not into it.
Yeah. I mean, this is like a guy who's like just had this experience where he's like essentially overworked himself and is exhausted. And the very first thing that happens is an energetic 10-year-old is, we don't know if he's 10, but like essentially 10-year-old is like, let's play some games.
Admittedly, I probably wouldn't have been super down too. I mean, I probably would have been like, I just really want to sleep.
Could I just like sleep maybe?
Yeah, but this kid is not having it. He's just like, no, I want to talk. I'm going to play games. And eventually, I forget sort of what conspires really, but I know at one point Brandon brings out some paper and some coloring utensils and just starts to color just like in the room. Just decides, I'm just going to hang out here because it's the place to be.
Yeah. And this also becomes the transition point. Right. So I think they are pretty explicit that you kind of fall asleep at this point.
Yeah.
And you wake up still as Mr. Saitou, but you are no longer a human being.
Yeah, which what I love, because there are these details where Brandon is drawing, and you do, before you fall asleep, look at the drawing, and Brandon, well, first shows you a piece of paper, and you're like, what is this math homework? And the kid's like, oh, actually, nope, that's math homework. Turns around, and you see these drawings of what he calls llamaworms.
Yes.
And they're all named Saitou.
And llamaworms are, I was thinking about like how to describe this. I want you to like look at your thumb.
Yeah.
And imagine that thumb has like little like brown stripes running horizontally across it. And then you have like little eyes at the top and a mouth.
Yep.
And sometimes your thumb has hair on it. And sometimes your thumb has glasses. And sometimes it's extra wide. And sometimes it's a little creepy looking. And that is what a llamaworm looks like. Kind of popping out of the ground. You see the thumb coming out.
That's a really good description. Now I'm like, I want to just draw a little face on my thumb.
New community challenge.
Well, that's part of the newsletter was draw fan art, draw yourself as Saitou, use your thumb.
Draw it on your thumb. Yeah. Bonus points.
That's amazing.
We should do that and just post it before we release this episode and just see if anybody else catches on.
Yeah, because for just a little bit of meta, we are recording this early because we're both traveling quite a bit this month, and so we're doing this the first week essentially of the month. But yeah, so we should.
People are gonna be like, why are we getting painted thumbs? Yeah. Is this like a 90s Nickelodeon cartoon
fan art? Yeah. But yeah, all of these Saitous, they are super cute. I forgot to ask Laura's opinion, but I'm like, do they have feet? Like, do they end? What is their bottom half? Like, what is down there? I want to know if they wear shoes. I want to know if they're all really long or if they all just like end right about where they poke out. Like, just super curious about.
Are they actually all connected to one singular being and we are just seeing it entering into a larger reality?
What?
Eldritch horror.
Eldritch, yeah. But yeah, you do fall asleep and you wake up as a Saitou, one of these fuzzy Saitos, yeah.
And in a meeting,
like a nightmare, honestly.
Yes, it's like if you had the nightmare where it's like you have to do a presentation for like class or work and you're not prepared. That is literally what you wake up to in this like magical world. Is you are in an office building. Everyone is llamaworms around you, including yourself, and they're like, "You ready to present?" And you're like, I don't know what we're talking about.
Yeah. It's like when you're not paying attention to the Zoom call.
very much that.
I've definitely done that.
I haven't.
You're a much better employee.
Locked in.
Much better employee than I am.
Never scrolling on TikTok during Zoom meetings.
I'm like, oh my God, hopefully none of my coworkers listen to this. It's part of what I do. I got to pay attention to the influencers.
Yeah, it's part of your job.
I'm doing my work.
It's not part of my job. Certainly not as acceptable for me.
So you're in this meeting, and basically this first section of the game is you going about the office, doing your work task, collecting metrics. Which is brilliant. The fact that your boss is like, I need 7 metrics stat. I'm like, this is literally the equivalent of when my boss, like I've had previous bosses essentially say, we need this post to go viral. And I'm like, yeah, okay. On it. Like
I have a whole PowerPoint page of metrics due in 2 weeks, and it's just like I definitely vibe with this opening sequence. Again, like the connection to like real life was very intentional and very effective.
And I think there's a really cool parallel that I'm just starting to put together between this idea of, okay, because metrics, the idea behind them is collecting data is supposed to give you quality information, right? You're supposed to get informed decisions. Like if you want to know if trains are cool, you got to have the metrics, right?
We don't know if trains are cool because we don't have the metrics.
But metrics on their own, devoid of context, have no meaning, right? Yes. And I think as we play through this game, what's really interesting is that human activity and communication devoid of context and quality won't have the same meaning as human interactions that do have that quality. And we'll see it later in the happy hour compared to maybe some of the other interactions we have. Yeah. So it's funny that we have this moment of being in an office that's supposed to be doing important, big work that doesn't quite mean anything despite the busy work that's being done.
And it's a great opportunity too because you meet your coworkers.
Yes.
And the other like llamaworm Saitou people. And again, just a brilliant job of recreating some of those like office tropes of like people that you definitely work with just here in the office.
Yeah. I want to call out one thing that on my playthrough, I didn't really connect, but upon discussion in the community, I thought this was a really good point and something that I was like, this was a spot for me that I didn't see, and now I'm like really happy that folks pointed it out. There's one character in particular you meet named Iritato. And my gut reaction, I mean, this is the perfect example of a coworker who definitely you don't want to be trapped in a conversation because they give you that feeling of like, oh my gosh, I can't leave. I really want to find an out, but they're not necessarily respecting like the boundaries I'm trying to set up. That kind of thing. One thing that more than one person pointed out in our community was like, what's interesting is this character has a lot of signs of perhaps being neurodivergent, and how work situations really don't facilitate the ability for people to create connections with others, especially if they're neurodivergent. And I thought that was a really good point that I didn't think of when I was playing it for the first time, that I wanted to highlight and say thanks to the community for spotting that.
That is such a great point. As you're engaging, it's like very clear that you stumbled into this person's hyperfixation.
Exactly.
And you like, I tried to like, you have the option in dialogue to try and like, I'm going to connect to what they're talking about,
Right,
or to try and like shuffle it off and like diminish so that you can move on with your life. And it doesn't really matter which way you go. The person just kind of steamrolls through that part of the conversation.
Yeah.
Which I think, again, we're going to talk about this a lot, how like this like quality of connection theme or motif is so important, because I think you're right. I hadn't really considered this, but that's another one where it's like, there are great, I mean, obviously, like, it can be really fun to talk to someone who has a deep understanding of something if the environment is set up for that, and to allow for that kind of space. Like, when I feel like I'm getting frustrated because a person is like trap talking me, it's usually because I feel like there's some added pressure externally that's preventing me from being able to engage with them.
Yeah, and in the game, I remember, and I actually went back, because as I was playing it the second time, I was like, was my reaction the same the first time? Because I had recorded it, and I went back and watched the recording, and I was saying in the midst of that playthrough, I was like, I think you have to go and like deliver something, or deliver a code. You have to remember a code, and so this external factor of you being like, like genuinely, because this Iridato is talking about an anime, and I'm like, I would actually very much love to talk anime with anyone, but because you're like, but I'm here at work, and even though I care nothing about the password that I'm supposed to deliver, it's the thing that I have to do, and that pressure makes it so that even if you were interested, you can't engage, not in the way that would be beneficial to either of you. So and I thought that, that was a really good point that the community brought up that I did not consider fully when I was playing.
I will say, I was kind of reviewing my screenshots before we hopped in today, and the facial expressions of Iridato and Saitou, as you are just like walking around the office, especially when they're engaging together, are just so funny. Like I was showing Jenny one screenshot where you have Iridato with like squiggly open mouth and like I don't know, squinty eyes, and it's kind of the expression of like "murr." That's kind of the expression he's making. And in the background, you see Saitou with like waterfall tears coming down his face. And it's like, I was like, the squiggly mouth thing is literally my favorite facial like comedic facial expression in anime. Yep. And Jenny said that the waterfall tears is her favorite.
It's my favorite. So it's really great that was captured in one scene, honestly.
Yes, and I had it. I had the moment.
The screenshot.
Oh God, so good. And it's interesting too, because it's like every one of these characters could be totally cool to like hang out with, the Saitous that you meet. And I was kind of wondering, like, are these people going to be people that you're friends with outside of the office?
Yeah.
Wide Toe being one of the like particularly like the work bestie.
Yep.
And neighbor, like literal neighbor of Saitou. They were so interesting. Was it Boss Toe? Was that the one that like had like a mustache and was like a gruff dude?
Honestly, reminded. Okay, you can correct me because I may butcher this Marvel reference, but he reminded me of the editor in Spider-Man.
J. Jonah Jameson, baby.
Oh my gosh.
Totally.
I heard like anytime Bosto had a line, I was like, I'm reading it in the Spider-Man.
I don't want to get a hole in one.
Yep. Exactly.
That was exactly how I felt too, like seeing that character. That was like, they so perfectly captured that curmudgeonly old man.
Oh, so good. Which that's a whole side thing where it was like, why they were talking about golf insurance, not getting a hole in one. I thought that was
We should explain this because we're going to come back to it at the end.
Come back to it.
So you go to like a party, which we'll talk about, but one of the things that's being discussed at the party is the importance of having golf insurance. Because if you get a hole in one, there is societal pressure that you buy all of your golfing friends like really nice gifts as like a sign of good luck or something. I have no idea if this is a real custom or not.
Me neither.
But as we start talking about like society and quality connections, I think this is a really interesting insertion into that story.
Yeah. Well, and I think it is. Wait, are we coming up to the party? Because that's the
Yeah,
happy
I think
hour,
that's the very
right?
next
That's
thing.
right. That's right.
So
when
you
we
finish
go
your
to
workday.
Yeah, and it's funny because you finish your workday and you're like, no, you know, now it's time to socialize. It's time to hang out. Work happy hour, and so Joel and I have worked together.
Mhm.
You know, work happy hours are maybe the most painful social situations for me in all time. All time. Which I think now, maybe also because the folks I'm working with now, I don't see very often. So when I hang out, it's like a little bit different. But working in an office and then being forced after work to go spend money and more time with people you've just spent 8 hours with, it's a different kind of pain to
I think
me.
it's the forced side of that.
Exactly.
Like if it's people that like you're in the trenches with and like you are organically saying, let's go grab a drink and just like decompress or whatever. That I love that.
Right.
But that is not what this work party is. This is so you have a presentation that you were not ready for that morning. You've collected your metrics and now you have to build your presentation for the next morning. But instead of getting work time at your work to do that, or alone time at home to do that, he is forced to go to this multi-hour work party at a restaurant.
And you can't leave.
And you can't, if you try to leave, it's like, oh, you can't leave yet. We're still doing whatever.
Go be social. I think Bosto even says something like, it's social time.
It's social time.
And it's just, you know, and like people are drinking, they're having a decent time. It's not like, it isn't the worst thing that can
It's not like
done,
it's inherently bad.
But it's just, going back to the conversation in terms of quality interactions, that's not how you build community or relationships with people. And I want to like highlight what Laura said in our discussion with her, where it's, you know, she mentioned a board game party where everyone was going to the party and no one was listening to each other. They were just talking at one another about themselves. And it just reminded me of how many just different situations I've been that have been very similar.
You know what's funny? I was talking with one of my good friends last night, and he's also in my Dungeons and Dragons group. And we were talking about how hard it is to like feel like you have quality community with people. And I was like, yeah, you know, even in our D&D group, there were like 5 of us. I was like, I love all of those people. I love spending time with them. But because when we hang out, even though we hang out every like 1 to 2 weeks to play this game, we are quite literally not playing ourselves. We are playing characters for those like 3+ hours. So it's not an opportunity to connect deeply with those people, even though I love them and I was spending time with them. And it's like, man, I got to remember that if I want to have a deep connection with these people, I actually need to hang out with them outside of D&D, because D&D is explicitly not an opportunity to connect with like the interpersonal of each other.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's weird too, I think, especially when you're hanging out with coworkers in a forced situation, you can't actually be yourself in that situation.
Absolutely not. There's a big mask. You still have professional mask on.
Exactly. So same. And it's like the type of connection which you can have work buddies and have a different professional relationship, and that's fine. But if it's like, if you're doing this thing like a happy hour in order to build closeness and community, you know, be a family, as some corporations like to do and say, it's not possible. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
There's a scene and a moment in that happy hour that I thought was especially poignant and really notable. And that's when you start talking to Saitou. And Saitou is not having it. They're just like, I want to get out of here. I am overwhelmed. I'm stressed. And then says something that's quite alarming, according to like llamaworm, I guess, worlds. And that's, I'm ready to dig to the center of the earth.
Ready to dig to the center of the earth.
And this is a phrase that comes up a couple times later. So this is very notable. And Widetoe's reaction was pretty strong against it. Like, you don't want to do that. You dig to the center of the earth, you don't come back.
Yeah.
So we know that this is perhaps like an allegory for maybe taking your own life, harming yourself. And this is like a really serious thing, which I only very casually have read this, so I don't know how true it is now, but especially for like salarymen, the rate of depression and like suicide supposedly is, or at least was at the time of the maybe through 2 or 3 years ago when I read the article,
Yeah, I read something
was
similar.
quite high.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know if you had any thoughts about that.
I had the same thoughts, and let's come back to like the entry of the game,
Right.
where that opening cinematic where you are Mr. Saitou and you are at a cubicle by yourself. You are on the train by yourself. And it's like when work consumes your entire waking life and you don't have time to form connections with like other real people outside of work, then a happy hour like this is quite literally the only place you would have to like make that call for help.
Yeah.
And that is like, that hit me as well, like very, very hard as I was watching this. I was like, the Saitou character, if he's living a life at all similar to what Saitou was living at the entry point, like, I don't know how else he would ask for help besides this in this exact way. I don't know how else he could do it.
Yeah.
So I think it's something like, it's like a self-perpetuating problem. Like work becomes so all-consuming that you don't find the community to have a fulfilling life. And then when things start to feel really dire, you don't feel like you have a community that you can reach out to and ask for help. And so opportunities like this might be the only opportunity.
Yeah. What really also struck me was Widetou's response, because up until that point, like Widetou is work bestie. Widetou is really good at making people feel better about themselves, consoling them. And what was really interesting is although Widetou does try consoling Saitou, a lot of it is very, I don't think it's meant to be trivializing, but it is very placating, where it's like, yeah, tomorrow will be better. Like, you just got to get through the storm.
Yeah, it's a little dismissive.
Yeah, and it's really tough because Widetou, like, as far as we know, is just wanting the best, wants everyone to be happy. Yeah. But what's the struggle is, while you are in a system like work where you have to do these things, like the system is not set up to allow a coworker to help one another through that situation, and B, like it doesn't allow you to help yourself. Like, how do you the thing to do to help yourself is to pull yourself out of that. And you can't because capitalism.
Well, and like if you're that person, if you are the Widetou, if you are the gregarious, outgoing one at your office, and you're also living a very lonely life like this, they are the hardest ones to be able to pick up, like if something is wrong, because they're putting on that show. And so part of me was wondering, like, is this the same thing that Widetou says to himself, like when he's struggling?
Yeah.
And that, I think to your point about it being systematic, like, or systemic, that's tough.
Yeah. And so we're in this situation, we have happy hour, and it's again, you have these coworkers who probably are wonderful, but you don't really connect with them deeply. And eventually you do get to leave the happy hour. You eventually go to bed. Sorry for the cutoff. Quick camera change because this room is getting too hot and the camera is sensitive. Sensitive little baby.
Our discussion is heating up.
It is. But yeah, basically you get home and you go to bed. You're too exhausted.
You can't work on your presentation.
You're like, well, maybe I'll get up early and do it tomorrow. I've done that many times. What happens next?
You don't wake up in time.
This like second worst feeling in the world. You wake up in this world in a nightmare. You wake up again in another nightmare. Yep. Honestly, two of the worst feelings in the world.
You are still a llamaworm. You are not a human. And I don't believe that the llamaworm is aware that he has a human counterpart. No. Right? Like, this is not one of those things where it's like, I woke up as a llamaworm. What world am I in? It's like, no, I woke up as a llamaworm. I've always been a llamaworm. I always will be a llamaworm. But you wake up, it's too late.
Yeah.
And I think, does he decide at that moment, like, I'm just not going into the office today?
Yeah.
Is that when he makes
that's
a decision?
When he starts to like really toy with it. He doesn't solidify it, but he's like, what's even the point?
Yeah. Which is actually probably the right move.
Honestly, if your day is already starting that rough, you might as well like take care of yourself, call it, and reframe it and try again later.
And work on that presentation that day, and then like the next day you can go back.
Exactly.
Professional advice from Geeks Grounds.
Exactly.
Just call off.
Just call in sick. Just do it. But there's a surprise, in addition to the horrible surprise of not being able to wake up in time for the presentation. There's more surprises for poor Mr. Saitou.
Please.
So as we were walking through the office earlier, we learned that Mr. Saitou does not like these birds called minimori. Which is honestly super perplexing to me. They're super cute, big round birds.
Just like a big, like an Angry Birds big round bird that's staring straight at you and looks very cute and says its name like a Pokemon.
Yeah, like should be a squashmallow kind of thing.
Yes. Yes.
And it's really funny because maybe okay, actually bird
and worm.
Yeah, so that's probably why.
I only had to play through the whole game, talk about it with the creator of the game, and then talk about it for an hour with you before I realized.
Yep, we came to that at the same time. Connections we build.
Oh boy.
But what's really funny to me is apparently he's got an infestation of minimori in his home, and there's a bunch of birds around, and he's terrified. He hates it.
And you get to explore his house a little bit.
Yep.
Or his like 1-bedroom apartment. And
well, before you explore though, isn't it, or does?
Go ahead.
I might have remembered this incorrectly because maybe you explore and that's when you hear a voice.
Yes.
Okay, that's probably it. Go ahead. Sorry, I interrupted.
You hear a voice, and it is, of course, our friend Brandon, but not Brandon.
Yes.
It is is it a radish?
Little bud. I was thinking like a tulip bud or a flower bud.
It's a tulip bud.
Yeah.
It's a little tulip bud with, cute anime eyes.
Yep.
And little buds.
Well, not the little buds.
He's just a bud.
Yes. But like the Brandon in the first scene in the hospital, this Brandon, for some reason, is in your house and saying, like, that he wants to hang out.
Yeah, essentially. Like, he's got things to do and he wants your help to, like, explore. Mm-hmm. And he's kind of connected to or, like, friends with the minimori.
Yeah.
Like, he's able to, like, talk with them.
Minimori whisperer.
Yeah, exactly. Because he says something like he can like clear them out by talking to them or something like that. So, buds.
Knowing children, having worked with children, mm-hmm. is one of those things where I'm like, you say that, but have you ever actually done it? You know what I mean? Like, kids will say stuff.
I didn't even think about that, and you're totally right.
Because kids will be like, I've totally done that. And then when you actually press them, and you're like, but have you mm-hmm. really? No.
Yeah.
No. They just think they can, so thus they can, which is kind of incredible.
And so, if I were to characterize Brandon or Bud, this Bud a little bit, you might think about like those kids that either in real life that are like just really serious and mature at a young age, like still like, but it's kind of funny because they're serious at such a young age. Or if you don't know any kids that are like this, I was thinking of like Abigail Breslin back in the day, like Little Miss Sunshine era. She's like the youngest daughter, and she's kind of like about 10 years old. And she's kind of has that like, she's funny and silly and goofy, but she's also like able to just connect with adults in like in a normal way. Yeah.
Which is interesting to me because as a kid, I was not that kid. I was not one that connected with adults very readily. I was super quiet, super shy. Just in general, but especially with grown-ups, I was like, I'm not going to talk. I'm not going to talk to you.
This just tells me that you weren't bullied as much as I was as a kid. All of my best friends were adults growing up because it was like kids my age did not like me. So,
oh my God,
it was like my defense mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was probably about 10 years old where it like really kind of heated up. And my dad worked with elderly people, and so I got really used to just like hanging around and talking with them. And so I got the like, you're very mature for your age, yada yada. And it turns out it's just like what that really meant was you don't have any friends your age or many friends your own age.
Well, and Brandon didn't, because we learn also that this Brandon kid, he also lives with his grandma and mm-hmm. spends a lot of time with elderly people.
Yes.
So you were Brandon.
I did feel a lot of connection with him as I was playing the game, to be honest with you.
It's amazing. So as you get to know Brandon wants to go to these crystal caverns and needs someone to help him get there. He's just a kid.
Yeah.
A precocious and really brave and fun kid, but kid nonetheless. And so through a little bit of bargaining, wheedling, Mr. Saitou says, fine, I will take you to these caverns. I might as well because I'm not going to work today. Let's go. And so you begin this adventure and you start going basically to the caverns.
Yes. And I do want to like throw in one little side point. You also get to explore Widetoe's apartment at the beginning of this sequence. And I only thought of this now because we were talking about how, you know, if Widetoe had something wrong with him, like he's so on the surface, like seems great. You would probably never know. Widetoe lives in almost an identical apartment to Saitou. Yeah. It's hard to imagine that he has a very different social life than Saitou has.
Yeah.
And the difference is he has more decorations in that apartment. And so it's like, well, maybe he's not as lonely. It's like, well, actually, maybe just on the surface, there's decorations.
Yeah. Maybe
the apartments are really a reflection of the soul.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's true, though. Clearly, if folks who are watching the video form, you can look back. I very much like decoration. I think your physical space is an extension of who you are in a lot of ways. Yeah. And so I think that's a really good point.
I love that.
Yeah.
So you get to explore his apartment but you also are like, you finally are unlocked as a character to explore your relatively open world of Saitou land. I'm not sure what.
Yeah, it's like these like little caverns, and I like that you get to go into like little shops and you get to explore the different snacks. Again, I was in love with the snack details. You could go to each one and just get a little item description for it, which was cute. Mm-hmm. And eventually you go into this other cave that leads you into sort of this cavern. Is there anything that you want to talk about before that?
Yes, real quick. It is my impression is that you are underground the entire game as a Saitou.
That's what I thought too.
Right? Okay, so like if you are trying to imagine this at home and you haven't played the game yet, imagine like your city streets, like you have buildings and everything.
Right.
And you would imagine in a normal game, like there's sky above that. Mm-hmm. But I think because you're in a worm culture, I think what you should be imagining is that there's actually rock above that, right? Like you are underground.
Yeah.
And then you walk through this doorway.
And just this cavern opens up and there's actually vegetation.
It's beautiful.
And sky, and it's stunning. Oh my gosh.
Light blue colors, like almost like aquatic looking spaces. It's like a giant circular area in terms of like how the map is structured. For me, that was like the true transformative moment, because like going from Saitou person to office Saitou llamaworm is like, okay, this is still like you're a magical creature, but you're not living in a magical world at this point. Not in my mind.
I mean, an office is not a magical world.
Turns out offices in my mind are not a magical world.
No.
Yeah, but then you walk in and open into this open cavern.
Yeah, it's a very Wizard of Oz moment where, like, when Dorothy opens the door and you see Technicolor for the first time.
Yeah,
it does feel a lot like that. I like that you pointed that out.
Yeah, and so when you walk into this cavern, there are statues of minimori and megamori, which are bigger versions of that same bird. They're like same design and everything, just plumper, bigger.
So good.
So they're like statues, and it's like, this is a video game. It's like, okay, this is obviously a puzzle. I've got to you're gonna have to like do something with these statues, right? And then you meet. Perfect for this weekend. This weekend, if you're listening, is the weekend that the new Indiana Jones movie is being released.
Well, it won't, because this is coming out at the end of the month.
Oh, I'm sorry. When we're recording it, it is the weekend that Indiana Jones came out. You meet Archeolato, who is like a llamaworm, but with an Indiana Jones hat on.
And a JoJo face.
Oh, and a JoJo face!
Which is like the best face ever. Oh my gosh. I am just... That's maybe like, if Waterfall Tears is maybe one of my favorite faces, JoJo, like... handsome face, is the second best face for me. I love it so much.
It's so good. And he's the one who kind of sends you on your quest, essentially.
Right. Yeah. And so again, the big impetus we have, or the big goal we have as a person, is to take this kid to the Crystal Caverns. They just really want to go, and you're like, okay. And to get there, you have to open up the cavern door, and to do that, you've got to collect some minimori.
Yes.
And you got to bring them and help this guy open up a minimori cafe.
Yes.
Because because he wants to bridge the gap in understanding between llamaworms and minimori and make a space where everyone can get together. And honestly, as someone who is a huge fan of cafes, who themed this whole club around a cafe, I'm all for it. Because
Absolutely.
when I think personally of quality relationship time, I don't think of happy hour with the work coworkers. I think of cafe time with friends. So I thought that was like a nice little, oh, here we go. We're trying to create these spaces. And we're helping him create this space.
I feel way more deeply connected to that character now than I did before.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
So good.
So you're really building the opportunity to build community as you are completing your little collection quest.
Exactly.
Oh,
I think it's
lovely.
really cute. And so I think a lot of the quests are pretty, this is where it gets the most gamey, I would say, in terms of you go into sort of different areas, you solve number puzzles by talking to a calculator. And the calculator basically unlocks different areas so that you can get these minimori.
It gives you hints.
It's hilarious.
And I just now realized, so the central mechanic of the game is like odd numbers, right? And so like almost every puzzle is just like doing something with odd numbers. And I'm just now realizing that that's like an elementary skill, like elementary level math skill. So like, you know, K through 5 in the States. And it's very possible that's the exact math skill that like Brandon or Bud was working on.
Yes.
Oh my word. I did not make that connection.
I was thinking that, and this is jumping slightly ahead, but as you do these puzzles, you find out that the voice coming from the calculator is from a sphinx, specifically undefined, the Sphinx of Math. Which is the best character. Honestly, one of my favorites in this game.
Yeah, same.
At the very beginning, when you get shown the math homework from Brandon, in the corner, Brandon has doodled a Sphinx of Math. I don't know if you noticed that.
I did not.
Yeah, and so in a very like Alice in Wonderland kind of parallel style here, you see if you play the game again and you go back to that scene, you'll see these details where Brandon also actually has a llamaworm on his shirt, a little llamaworm icon, and the Sphinx of Math is there, and so there are these connections. So you're absolutely right. I think the math puzzles are actually like drawn from Brandon's homework, probably.
This is brilliant because, you know, actually up until this point, what I was thinking about is how when you are working in a corporate job, at least in my job, I do a lot of work in like Excel and things like that. It is so much like the numbers and the calculator are telling you what to do. And so what I was thinking as I was playing the game is like, just one more example of the calculator telling me what to do.
Dang, life by numbers.
Yeah, life by numbers. But having this connection back to Brandon and his homework, that's such like I like that.
Yeah,
like
that's a much more fun way.
Yeah, I'm gonna hang on to that one for sure.
Yeah. One thing that I wanted to highlight is we know that Mr. Saitou is terrified of minimori.
Yes.
But part of the puzzle and part of the thing that he needs to do is bring the minimori to the sort of central area with Archeolato. Did you want to dive into sort of this character development that happens with him as he does that?
Yeah, maybe I'll start it off. So like I think there are like maybe 8 statues or something like that, which tells you that you need to collect roughly like 8 or so minimori, megamori.
Yeah.
And after you solve each of these like little calculator puzzles, it opens a doorway to where a minimori is. And you walk up to it and it's just like the first time as Saitou, it's like, what do you mean I have to carry this bird all the way out of this cavern back to this statue? And you just kind of play through the game, and over time, like you put up less and less resistance to this idea of carrying it, to the point where like you're even moving giant like several times your size as a worm megamori back to this statue. So what did you notice about the development of Saitou with that?
I think this goes back to a little bit more on the theme of relationship between especially like this younger, curious, in some ways, like very brave kid that we see in Brandon. And then Mr. Saitou, who is very much like stuck in his ways, doesn't want to push and go beyond that status quo, very like restricted in sort of what he wants to do, very just like passive in a lot of his life.
Yeah.
And you know, he didn't want to clear the minimori out of his own house, right? His own place of living.
So good.
And to get Brandon to be able to say like, I'm gonna do this for this kid who I just met, but you can tell he's feeling more and more close to as they take this journey together, to face his fear and to be willing to change himself and push himself further for someone that he's building a relationship with, I think was really cool to see, because that's what happens when you actually do make friends, right? You do change, you do push yourself in different ways, and in some of the best friendships, you are challenged and like uplifted in a lot of ways by the people you hang out with. And so I think just in terms of general friendship, that was a really cool thing to see. But also as an older person looking to a younger person and being willing to learn from them, I think that's really powerful too. Because like we talked with Laura, like as we always tend to think about kids learn from adults, but in a lot of ways we can reclaim joy and wonder and a lot of appreciation for the world around us if we pay attention to what kids do. And I think they had that a little bit there too.
I'm going to tell a personal story now about Jenny and I.
No, what? Oh God.
In a way that pumps Jenny up, and it's going to make her uncomfortable that she's being pumped up, but we're going to do it anyway.
Okay.
So I love to dance. And started dancing in high school. My friend at the dry cleaner that I worked at took me to the back of the dry cleaner, and it was like 2004, and Usher's Yeah was on the radio, and he was like, "Oh, I can teach you how to do the Yeah dance," and I was like, "Okay." And so that's how I like started enjoying dancing. Then went to college, didn't get any opportunities to dance, came back as a teacher, became like the sponsor of the hip hop dance club. So it was like me and a bunch of kids that could dance like way better than I can even today. And like, but like, I just loved being surrounded by it. I enjoyed it. And then right before we moved to Portland from Indiana, it was like, I was in this like hip hop dance exercise class, which like the emphasis was definitely on the exercise. And I was like, that's probably the most I'm ever going to like really be able to do something like this. Roughly 6 to 8 months after I moved to Portland, I met Jenny at work and learned that Jenny is a dancer, professional dancer, incredible dancer, also teaches dance classes. And at some point it came up that on like Thursdays during our lunch break, she was leaving to go teach a dance class in the middle of the day. And after like working up my courage, I was like, can I come with you? And basically, like the very long story, very short, is Jenny's an incredible dancer, but also an incredible teacher and incredibly good at helping you like push beyond some of the things that you might be comfortable with. And like, oh, like this move might be not something that you really want to do, but like here's a way you can access it regardless of where you are in your skill level.
Yeah.
And I have been taking dance classes relatively consistently ever since then, oftentimes with Jenny as my teacher, but not always. And so I think the point that you just brought up about how important it is to have quality community and connections with people, because it pushes you to do things that otherwise you probably wouldn't do. You absolutely did that for me. And so
shucks,
like significantly changed a major portion of my life because of that. Like I would not be dancing in classes at all if it weren't for you.
Yeah. Well, you're one of my favorite dance buddies, so I appreciate you.
We were, for those of you on the podcast, we were like shimmying our shoulders.
Yeah.
in a fun way. It was very fun. So yes, it is important to have quality connections with people and friends. They push you to do things you wouldn't be able to do otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Very, very true. Yep. So yeah, moving on with the game.
If you want to make one of your friends uncomfortable, tell them something that they did for you to stretch you. It's a great way to make them feel uncomfortable.
It's the best way.
Perhaps the best way.
Oh my gosh. But yeah, we go through this journey with Mr. Saitou, with Brandon, and you know, more so we see Brandon pushing Mr. Saitou and encouraging him and making sure that he feels like he's doing great. And they meet a lot of fun characters on the way. I do want to spend a lot more time on one more than the others, and that's the Sphinx of Math.
Okay.
Because this character I found super interesting, especially in the context of value, your role at work, and what you do, and how you conceptualize yourself. And this Sphinx has been talking to us, giving us riddles, doing math puzzles with us, and we finally meet them, and we find out that they're actually quite stressed. They're actually having a lot of anxiety about themselves as a Sphinx because they are not good at riddles.
They're not good at riddles.
They're really not good at riddles. They keep forgetting it and getting distracted. And and they say
it tries the only one on the spot.
And it doesn't work. But what they're really good at is math. And they even are good at IT because they set up calculators that are intercoms around the whole cavern system. And so you actually have Brandon, this amazing kid, who encourages the Sphinx and says, hey, well, just be a Sphinx of math. You can do this.
Yeah.
Like, you can find yourself in this role that you're in and find a happy medium, especially in the context of value and work and making sure that you feel like a human in your work. I thought that was a really nice story moment. Particular.
I love that. And I had not drawn some of that any of those like deeper connections that you just called out. That is so good. Wow. As always, mind being blown mid podcast. One of the things that I thought was interesting in the moment when you meet the Sphinx is there's a cherry pie next to it. Here's the thing that you learn before you make your way to that Sphinx. Like, if you like explore as much as possible before you hit that like wall where you have to talk to the Sphinx, the last wall that you hit there is a minimori, which is very clearly like the last one that you're going to have to collect.
I think it's called the gigamori.
Gigamori,
yeah, it's like
the
ultra
biggest,
big,
the ultra big one. It's like blocking a waterfall, and it's like it will only move if you feed it. And so I cannot tell you how many times I walked up to the Sphinx and up to the cherry pie, thinking, well, obviously the cherry pie is the thing I have to get to feed the gigamori to unlock this game. But it's a red herring. Yeah. It's a red cherry herring.
Oh my gosh. I didn't even make that connection between the cherry pie and the gigamori.
Now I feel like a big dummy.
No. Oh my gosh. Because that would be that would be the connection. I just didn't explore properly.
Oh my goodness. That's so funny.
Oh my gosh. But,
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to move on. So if you have more details on that section.
Was it in that section that you meet like the ghosties?
Yeah, the envoys.
The envoys.
This is where I would say my one bit of feedback on the game appears. It's meant to be a bite-sized, shorter experience, but they introduce these envoys, which are sort of these bad-feeling apparitions. I think, what was it they prey on or feed on? Like,
I don't remember.
Basically fears. They're a representation of fears and fears and emotion. And this is a thing that was in Rakuen, which was a larger game. But if you're not familiar, I felt like this appearance of the envoys does kind of like come a little bit out of left field. So that was my one feedback with the game, where there's certain elements like the envoys that I wish had a little more time to breathe, because it's a really important concept in Rakuen. And I think in this game, pretty significant if you're looking at this as a lens of like fear and loneliness and sort of these extremes of human emotion. But yeah.
Oh, God.
What?
I thought they were there. Did you touch any of them?
No.
I was curious. So I touched one.
Yeah.
And when you do, it just takes you immediately back to the Sphinx. And so I thought, oh, this is a teleportation mechanic. You're supposed to use these things to more quickly travel between rooms.
I mean, that's a smart thing to do.
I did not at all connect it to the deeper implications of the emotional story that was happening.
See, but I don't think that's through any fault of your own, because the only reason I knew about them was because I played Rakuen.
So what you're saying is it could have been expounded upon.
Yeah, I think that is the one weakness of the game, where it is, for the most part, it doesn't assume that you know anything about the world, and I think it does great. With the envoys, I felt like if you didn't know about Rakuen,
which I didn't.
Which you didn't. how do you know exactly sort of the depths of which they represent, which you don't.
Yeah.
So I think that's my one feedback. The one point of the game where I was like, oh, this feels a little bit like it went a little too fast and ran the risk of running over people's heads.
That's interesting. So what I will say, when you are in the space with them, the music changes, the color palette of of the caverns change. It all becomes a bit more ghosty,
like sepia
tone.
Of,
yeah, great example or description. So what I will say is, for me, it was clear that the stakes had raised. That I can say like was effectively communicated as a person who had not played Rockman.
Yeah.
But I did not get to experience the broader implications of what their presence meant. So I think that's a really great insight.
Yeah. And I think later on, there's a conversation, the one in the train, where, because right around that time, Brandon asks a question of Mr. Saitou and says, oh, what is it? Like, are you afraid of anything? There's a question that's asked, and it's a pretty significant one, so I feel a little bad that I don't remember what it is. But whatever it was, Mr. Saitou pretty much lies or at least doesn't go into the full truth and says, like, I've never been afraid, or I've never felt like this emotion, and I'm forgetting what exactly it was. And the envoys, it happens right around that time. So this is something that later we'll come back to at the very end, but at the time, I don't think the significance of something like that was just really clear.
That's interesting. This, because you do at one point spark this kind of train flashback, flash sideways thing. Was it about this time that happens?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, would you mind talking about that a bit?
Yeah, no, at the very end.
Oh, that's the very
That's
end.
the very
end.
Okay, what you're thinking of is the very end. But yeah, I think pretty much you've collected the moris, and what happens? The door opens.
The door opens, but you do meet one more great character.
You do.
Before that happens. So, you help Archeolato, open his cafe or whatever. But right before you do that, you meet one of, like, if Brandon / Bud is one of my favorite characters in the game, the second favorite character in the game has got to be this Aunt Radish. What's Grandma Radish? What's her name?
Auntie Onion.
Auntie Onion.
Yeah.
I just want everything to be a radish for some
radish,
reason.
Auntie Onion, tomato. Yeah.
Clearly tomato. So you unlock a little a hidden room, and there's a campfire in the middle of this cave, and there's like this elderly woman who's at the campfire.
Yep.
And we talked about this yesterday when we were doing the interview, but it was this really special moment where the game slows down for a minute, and you get to have another moment of quality connection with another character besides Brandon / Bud.
Right.
What stood out to you about that interaction?
What stood out to me most was the way we get to learn. We learn a lot about Brandon then. We confirm a lot of the details that we have already been discussing in this podcast, where this is a kid who we don't know exactly what's wrong. We don't know how serious it is, but he's not well. Right. Something's wrong inside. He can't really play around with other kids like you would expect a kid to be able to. He hangs out a lot with his grandmother and other elders. And he's a kid that's really familiar with loss.
Right.
All of his friends are elders, thus he is familiar with them passing away. And he's a kid who really is able to have these conversations with elders and really listen and learn from them, which I found super intriguing because that's not something that happens in video game or in media in general.
Sure.
When we see older people in games, it's usually a couple of tropes, like crotchety older man. We see sage who just releases a few bits of knowledge and pieces out, Gandalf style. You don't see elders sort of in these nuanced, like, as human beings.
Just normal people.
Yeah, as people. Yeah. And I thought this was a really interesting moment because you see Aunt Onion as that, and you see Brandon's relationship with elders as, like, just normal relationships with people. Yeah,
and this was a really interesting point, again, in the conversation that we had, or in the interview that we had. talking about the importance of the relationship with elders, especially in like
Mm-hmm.
Eastern cultures, was like an important motif that she wanted to have come through the game. And then also our relationship with and to death.
Yep.
So what Jenny was just describing about Brandon being comfortable saying goodbye to people, that's not just like Jenny reading into it. Like Brandon is able to explicitly talk about this. He's able to talk about saying goodbye to these people. And man, I have a hard time thinking about that, dealing with that. And the idea that this kid is able to express that in such a, I wouldn't say nonchalant way, like he clearly understands the importance of what's happening, but in a way that's like, this is a part of life. It is not something that can or even should be avoided. I think further feeds into his role or his character as this person who's like, he understands something deeper about the world than Saitou does, or that most of us do.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because I think as a general society, we're very afraid of old age and we're very afraid of death.
Yeah.
And so to have Brandon as a character be very okay talking about it, like as a society, it's like we don't talk about it because none of us really want to face it for a variety of reasons. And so it's just really, it was really neat to experience that in a game and to have that come through the lens of a kid, which in so many ways, I feel like when we talk about kids being able to see, cut to the truth of things, I think on a lot of different topics, I think it kind of hit just home pretty well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else about Auntie Onion that you want to?
No.
Okay.
I think it was interesting she was sitting by the fire because I kept thinking about caramelized onions, but that's whole different.
That's pretty good.
That's a different detail.
I like that. I like that a lot.
I'm like, you should step away. I don't know if this is bad for you or not.
And like she was locked behind a stone door. It's like, how long you been in here,
just
Auntie Onion?
slowly caramelizing.
Yeah. You do encounter a poster as you are in the cave.
Yes.
For what was the name of the band?
No Holds Barred.
No Holds
Just
Barred.
A great
BARD.
name. Yep.
Like a musician bard.
Yep.
Great pun. Fantastic. Again, lots of like little small things all throughout this game, little nuggets. That was one of my favorites.
This is a funny game. We haven't really dove into it, but there are so many moments in this game where I would laugh out loud because it's just funny.
Yes,
absolutely. In a really try hard kind of way too. Like it's just like everything is so nonchalant in how it's presented, and you're just like, oh, there
with the combination of like very funny like anime faces, like to support the funny thing that's happening. Like it was so good.
Yeah, but No Holds Barred is Brandon's favorite band. Super big fan of Lil Buds, who's like the leader of the band, I think, or
he
at least
looks just like Brandon but with sunglasses
literally
on.
Just like Brandon. And so they decide to also hit up the show.
Yes.
I forget exactly why.
Because that's where the Mega or Gigamori is.
Right, that's where the Gigamori, that's right.
So you like the last thing you have to do is like go to this concert and he's behind, like he's in this back corner, like you can see him in the room and you're like, oh, okay, time to finish the game. But before you do, you get a killer concert.
Yes. Oh, wait, we forgot. There's a moment in relationship that I want to highlight before we get to the concert. And that is when they're getting the sunglass, because you have to sneak in. You can't go in just on your own. And so they're like, oh, let's go in and pretend Brandon's Lil Buds. And Mr. Saitou sees a tie. And Brandon notices that Mr. Saitou sees this tie and realizes that Mr. Saitou loves this. It's like a funky dessert tie, I think, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah.
This moment honestly got me choked up in the happiest of ways because this is Mr. Saitou, not a person you'd see buying things for himself, not a person who probably has friends who buys him gifts. And when Brandon noticed that Mr. Saitou loved this tie, he basically is like, we're going to get you this tie. And he bargains with the mushroom shopkeep to get this tie.
That's right.
And it was just one of those moments where I'm like, people are good. You know, it's like when you have someone you do have that community with, when you have a quality relationship with, and you have friends who take care of you. It was just one of those examples of like people taking care of people. Yeah. And I thought it was just really, really cute.
One of my favorite things to do is is to notice people's like new thing.
Yeah.
New haircut, new glasses, like cool outfit they took a risk on. Like I love to notice it. I love to hype them up about it. Like it's just like it makes me feel good when I get to do that for someone else.
Yeah.
And when someone does it for me, it's just like it's like it's an affirming it's a life affirming experience.
Yeah. There's a study. I talk about it all the time because I think we need to hear it more. Super scientific dessert study where if it's like I'm speaking your language.
I'm already in.
The scientists at this university or wherever, they did a study where they had some people eat dessert alone, like a slice of cake, and then they got to rate their joy and happiness after eating the cake. They had another group eat dessert but ask them to share it with someone else and then rate their enjoyment of the dessert after sharing with someone. And the people who shared their dessert ended up reporting more overall enjoyment of the experience than people who ate it alone, even though they got less dessert. And I think this idea of finding joy in sharing your happiness with others is something that came through in this moment of Brandon seeing the joy that Mr. Saitou had over the tie and wanting to give more of that joy over because that brought Brandon joy. It just reminded me of that dessert study, but also this
insert waterfall tears.
I know.
Oh my God, that's so good.
And this just shows how caring of a kid he is. Like, just so good.
You know what? The creator mentioned this in the interview, how she was on a train in Japan and complimented a person, like a businessman, on his tie. That was like clearly like an out of the norm tie.
Yeah.
And that like the person that she was with was like, oh, you can't just like tell people that their ties look good. But like how you could see it really like made this guy's day. And I was like, and just now I'm making the connection that like that got represented in this game. And
it is interesting because again, Mr. Saitou is a character who is not one to stand out, right?
Yeah.
Like llamaworms are all very similar. They're all very sort of conformed into this one type of identity, Saitou identity, Saitenity. And so it is really also fun to see Mr. Saitou want to express himself in a way to pick up a dessert tie, which is kind of cool.
I love this.
Which is also interesting because earlier in the game, he also was like, I can't eat snacks even though I really love them because I'm on a diet.
That's right.
So it's like, again, just accepting more of himself and embracing just like those joys.
That's so good.
All these small details.
Yeah. There are a lot. Little nugs.
Yeah.
Enjoy the little nugs.
Little nugs. The concert is good, by the way.
So yeah, you get into this like nightclub because this 10-year-old is successfully impersonating a professional musician. Yeah. And you get to watch this band, No Holds Barred, perform. And one of the things we learned is that this came from like people from the community or that are like actual rappers on TikTok that like contributed to
the verses
of the song that you get to see performed.
Yeah. It's really cool.
Very cool. And like one of the things we haven't talked about at all yet is that the entire premise of this game was born out of the creator's conversation with her community, I think in Discord maybe.
In Twitch.
In Twitch, in Twitch. And it was like, there's this llamaworm. And like they start just like literally on the fly in conversation creating the entire backstory and world of what it's like to be a Saitou. And like Saitou lives alone at home and like Saitou wears a tie and Saitou does this. And it is one of the things that was like one of the most inspiring moments of the entire like interview and conversation was hearing about just how much of this game was created alongside the online community that she built over the years.
Just really quick aside, shout out to Laura's live stream. If you haven't listened to it, it's genuinely like up in the top echelons of streams on Twitch. Like I think it's maybe one of my favorites. Whenever I can tune in and just listen, she does an amazing job of not only creating fun community moments that are really like surprising and delightful, but also regularly just plays music and sings. So it's just like you're having this beautiful live concert in your ears and on your screen. It's wonderful. It's at Super Shigi. So check it out. It's very, very good.
And she also did the music for the game. So if you played the game and enjoyed the music, she also did that. And the music was incredible.
Yeah, Laura does so much of the work in both Rakuen and this. It sounded like she had maybe a few other people helping with support with art and a little bit of support elsewhere in production or programming or porting. But like music, writing, the pixel art, like all of that is Laura, which is astounding. Like,
absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
That anybody
really
has
cool.
that many skill sets.
Too
And I'll just like
talented.
to double down on what Jenny said. Jenny is very aware of most big streamers and streams. So if she is telling you that this is one of the best stream experiences, you can take that to the bank, baby. That's that's the Geeks and Grounds Kimchica guarantee. So in a world,
stamp of approval.
Yes, in a world where a bunch of like really shitty live streamers are really popular, stop that. Go check out Laura's stuff. Super shiggy,
Laura.
baby. That's like absolutely top tier.
That is very true. I'm glad. Like, really, truly, I will not hype up my own opinion often, but for Laura, I will absolutely double down on that too.
Yeah. So it has been quadruple downed on at this point. Go check it out. So you watch this incredible performance. It's very much like the classic, like your mid-season on the anime that you're watching, and like there's a class like performance, like that's the vibe. Like everybody's rocking out, everybody gets a little silo moment. Yes. Solo moment. Yes, absolutely. And it's also just like really, really good.
It's so good. The animation of the pixel art is just fluid. It is luscious. It's so just tasty. It's so good.
Yes.
And the song itself is just fun.
Yeah.
Like
banger.
It's just good wordplay, fun puns, just really wonderful, and you can't help but smile. I think my cheeks were definitely hurting by this point because I was just smiling the whole time.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point that we have not talked about either. Like, even though we talked about how the beginning of this game like is kind of dark and lonely,
right?
That video or that sequence is a couple minutes, and then the rest of the game is just like joyful moment after joyful moment, because you are literally supposed to be experiencing a growing sense of joy as you play through the game. So if you are like wondering like, oh, is this going to be like a heavy game to play?
I mean, there's a pretty heavy part at the end.
Yeah, so there are important moments or like heavy things happen, but like the experience you are having as a player throughout the game is 95+% a positive, joyful moment for you to play through.
I would definitely agree. Yeah, there's like one moment that really got me, but it was interesting because it wasn't like, I'm so sad, I'm crying because I'm heartbroken. I'm crying because this is connecting with me on a deeper level of like my hope for what I hope to like leave this game with and put out in the world. I think that's why I was crying. That's
good.
Yeah. I mean, congrats to Laura for making us feel good, deep feelings like this. But yeah, I think it wasn't like, I don't know. I've played some dark games and cried because you just are sad at what's happening to the characters. And yeah, that was not the type of cry this was.
Every time I play through Mario and I steal Princess Peach away from Bowser, I look at Bowser's sad face and I'm just like, man.
When you let Yoshi go, you jump off of Yoshi.
Every time you sacrifice Yoshi to make a jump, it's just like
the deep.
I'm sorry I let you down.
Feelings there.
my dinosaur friend.
I know.
No, but I absolutely agree. Like, you are given the opportunity to connect. And I think for me, again, working in this corporate world, just being able to experience some of these deeper truths and joys of life and like be reminded that there's stuff outside of work that you should and must. It's vital for life that you invest in these things. That I totally agree. Like, it connected with me on a deeper level. So it wasn't like I'm so sad. It was this is beautiful because it's reminded me of something deeper, like a deeper truth about the world.
Yeah. Oof. I like the point you said about it being vital, because it is. And we'll go into, because that we'll see that very clearly in the ending. But after the show, I mean, at that point, you're kind of like, hey, we've opened the caverns. It's time to go.
It's all in downhill to the cavern from here.
Yeah.
You carry the Gigamori out to the last pedestal. You set it up. Archaeolato
gives you his blessing. Yeah.
Yeah, you're good to go. And you get your Indiana Jones reference about how it belongs in a museum.
Yep.
And yes,
funny,
exactly.
Funny.
Very funny. And then you get to, it's right then, right, that you get to go to the crystal caverns.
Yes.
When you get to these crystal caverns, I was saying, like, I have like so many screenshots from playing this game, and almost half of them are from this relatively short sequence in the crystal caverns where you get a deeper moment with Bud and Saitou, and beautiful music, and then the pixel art and animation in the background is just like absolutely stunning.
I for a time had it as a desktop background.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, because it was so beautiful.
Oh.
And it's just the meaning of arriving to the Crystal Caverns. This whole time, you think you're like, this kid just wants to go see these caverns. Cool. That's fine. I'll take this kid to the caverns. We learn a bit more about the actual motive that Brandon has. And it honestly, it did that. That's the point in which I was like, waterfall tears.
Waterfall tears. Yep.
And again, not because it was so sad, but because it was such a big act of caring that I was not expecting from the game. Did you want to kick that off?
No, you're in it.
Oh,
Keep
okay.
going.
Well, so we are looking at the caverns. And Brandon says my favorite line in the entire game. And he says, "Thank you for allowing me to keep my promise." And you learn that Brandon's hope wasn't necessarily to go to the Crystal Caverns, but he had an older friend who wanted to go to the Crystal Caverns. And so that friend had passed away without being able to achieve his wish. And in going to the Crystal Caverns, he was allowing that like memory of his friend to live on and really pay this sort of respect to this friend who had passed away. I was like, oh my God. Like I was just like crying at that point. It was just so much.
It didn't make me cry the way a lot of other Geeks and Grounds games make me cry. And I think it was because I was so in awe of that moment. And I want to use that word awe very intentionally here. I actually have a friend who just finished his doctoral work at Oxford studying musical awe. How like there are
what a cool,
absolutely incredible,
gosh.
right? And it's like the idea is that like there are elements of music that like scientifically are proven to like help you experience this sense of awe. So if you go to concerts and you feel like overwhelmed by emotion or like this cohesive sense of oneness with the group that you're with, or like if you happen to be a person of some religious belief that connects with music in that way, like what stood out to me is how you often need some external point of connection to help you experience awe. And that is how I felt in this moment when I was playing the game, and you had that like Brandon telling this story of, this older person that didn't get to, and like for me the implication was they were so busy with the other things in life they didn't get to have this natural experience. That it made me like, number one, I was on a plane when I finished the game. Like it made me like think about the fact that like I am in the air, like thousands of feet in the air. I can look out and see these beautiful clouds next to me. And I was like, being able to recognize these external moments that can help you feel awe is like, it's such a very literal privilege in a world that is trying to force you into the mundane and the routine. And I felt like that moment really like helped me connect to something deeper.
That's so good. Yeah. It's hard. It's hard to remember to feel that. And I think going back to the breakfast example, where I think that's why for me, especially when thinking about games like this and smaller games, generally cozier games that have these themes that address almost these more mundane topics, or these topics that happen on a daily slice of life kind of level. It's like, this is the life we're living. And if we don't approach it with that sense of awe, like, what are we doing? What are we doing? Because we decide what matters. And so to put attention and to put like awe and joy into something is a very, we need to be able to do that. And we need to be able to be intentional about that. Because otherwise, then what is it? Nothing. It's nothing.
It's quite literally a waste of your life.
Yeah.
You are wasting your life.
Exactly.
And I realize like, because of how our society is structured, it does become a privilege to get to experience that. So if you are listening, and like, we are not at all trying to be looking down on people who are like caught up in that like quote rat race because of just the structures of our society. Like there are so many people that are forced to work multiple jobs to support their family. And the idea of like having even a weekend off for many people is not a real thing. And so I want to say, like, as we are discussing this, like this is us discussing this from a position of like, yeah, I can take a day off sometimes and I can go
Right.
on a hike, or I can go to my like quote crystal cavern moment. But that because of how our society has been structured, that becomes a privilege.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It sucks.
It does. It really does. Yeah, and it's tough. It's tough and in some ways frustrating because you're like, well, how am I supposed to see the awe if I have to pay bills?
Yeah.
But that's the thing. It's like, what are the ways we can capture small joys and begin to again flex that muscle in our daily lives, where if we can't totally break the system yet, we still need to thrive and not just survive.
Yes. Yes.
And so it's important to, even in realizing the constraints we have and wanting to break them and fight them as much as we can, still see like, well, what are the ways that I can, at least on the small levels, improve what's going on or change and reframe some of what I'm thinking to help protect myself. And I think that's where, like, when we talk about self-care too, that's where it becomes actually impactful. Because I get frustrated when people are like, oh, I'm going to self-care and like take one day and do some yoga, or take one day and like do this or that. And I'm going to journal. And it's like, well, how is that fundamentally changing your framework?
Yeah.
You can and have that be impactful, but a lot of times it's like just sort of this surface level fix. And so I think this true idea of self-care is maybe a little bit harder and a little bit more like picking up a minimori and challenging yourself versus like doing something that allows you to stay comfortable.
So I guess like if I were to think about this from like a takeaway for me perspective, or like application to real life perspective, and knowing that it can be a privilege to have the opportunity to experience those moments, I think like the starting point has to be just recognizing that there are opportunities to experience awe out there.
Yeah.
Number one, they exist.
Yep.
And number two, admitting to yourself that you want that. And then maybe there's like opportunity for you to start identifying like a way to get there, etc.
Right.
Like that's all so personal. Like I would never like say anything about that, but like just recognizing that there is a criticality or a vitalness to this connection to something deeper than your daily routine. And then deciding that you want it. And then like you can reorient your life however it needs to be to like actually make that happen, like whatever. But like just taking a second to stop and be like, you know what? When I watch Planet Earth and I see the Grand Canyon, that actually is really cool and does in fact exist in this world somewhere. And maybe there's something that would let me feel like that kind of inspiration or awe in life.
I love that. I do. Yeah. Just the first step is awareness.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my God. When I moved to Portland, I had never been to a national park in the States before, just ever before. And we stopped at our first national park was the Badlands in South Dakota.
Yeah.
And I was like, the world actually looks like this in places.
Yeah.
There are places on the planet Earth, which is where I happen to live, that look like this. And it was such a like, I was 29 or something like that at the time. Like, I had never experienced anything like it before. And it was such a like awe-inspiring moment that helped me just like, oh my God, like this is real. And like, if I oriented my life in specific ways, I could experience these things.
Yeah.
I could see this.
One thing also that I want to like highlight is that awe doesn't have to be
a crystal cavern.
It doesn't have to be a crystal. It doesn't have to be a place necessarily. What really resonated with me about Brandon is that his joy and awe wasn't necessarily going to the crystal cavern. It was doing that act for someone he loved. And so more so than being like, oh, yeah, let's find something external to go to or buy or acquire or do specifically because that's going to give me the feeling of awe. What can I do for other people that will allow me to feel like, allow me to bring them joy, and in turn that will give you a sense of appreciation for other things besides yourself. And I think that's good. When I'm thinking about awe and the ways that we can reframe our life, that's probably one of the big takeaways for me in playing this game is like, stop maybe internalizing so much and like try to think a little bit more externally a little bit.
Laura talked a little about that in our interview with her, the importance of
Mm-hmm.
that, looking outside of yourself when you have those moments.
Yeah.
It reminded me of just a really basic idea, which is Christmas. So we get like so wrapped up in like buying each other gifts, and it's
Yeah.
like when you are old enough that you have enough money that you can just like buy yourself things that like would be gifts. That's the point when you really just start focusing on giving gifts to others and like making that the purpose of Christmas,
Yeah.
rather than like, oh, I get to open a present on Christmas.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's just like a small microcosm example of this, but I don't know. Seems relevant.
Yeah, it does. Well, and there comes a point, like, I think there was a point also where I was like, I would much rather like do something with someone else than get a present, or I would much rather like share an experience.
Yes.
And I think that's something I've been thinking about too with playing this game, and just sort of how it's making me think about the ways that, in general, what brings me joy. And ultimately, it's not the latest and greatest thing that I've purchased, and it's also not doing things like certain elements. Yeah, I like doing things by myself, but the memories that stick, the things that kind of transcend experiences for me, is the stuff that I've shared with others, which is kind of cool to think about.
Oh, this is so good.
Yeah.
Especially as we start talking about the end game.
Which this part is maybe where it gets a little bit more sad, in the sense that you're revisiting and remembering why Saitou is here in the first place.
Why don't you give us the
why do I have to get okay?
Because you've been doing such a good job.
Okay. Well, to close out this final act of the game, you've gone to the Crystal Caverns. It's time to get on the train, Spirited Away style, which lovely reference there. And you and Brandon get on the train so that Mr. Saitou can either take Brandon back home or go home. You're going,
kind of the vibe.
Yeah, you're going because, actually you just left your apartment.
Yeah.
So, you're taking Brandon back home. And on this train ride, Mr. Saitou takes a beat and realizes that he's got something he wants to get off his chest. And he says, hey, back when we were in the caverns, you asked me a question and I didn't tell you the whole truth. I omitted some information. And the accident that happened, it comes to light that Saitou was feeling like he wanted to dig to the center of the earth. And that was something he was actually trying to do. And that's when we get the flash sideways, where we see the actual IRL human Mr. Saitou at the train subway station, stepping out into the tracks in front of like an oncoming train. And so we learn that, going back to Saitou during that happy hour when he was in a place trying to call for help, Mr. Saitou perhaps either had tried, or whether or not he had tried, didn't feel like he had anyone to help and wanted to just sort of finish everything out for now.
Yeah.
That was something I suspected at the beginning, but I had honestly forgotten it throughout the course of the entire journey. And so it was this hard, like, oh my gosh, I remember why we're here in the first place moment, which that was tough for me because we had so much just pure, like, we're living this life, we're exploring, we're having a great time with friends. Oh, the reason why we're actually revisiting all this is because we're in a dream, we've been injured, and we actually have some really hard truths we have to face about ourselves.
Ooh. The idea, golly, you just like putting all this out there like in one point, you're making me think so many different thoughts that I had not at all considered. Like, first of all, I just accepted as truth that like, oh, he passed out in the subway. And he woke up in a hospital because he had passed out. So it didn't even occur to me that he had maybe committed suicide or attempted to commit suicide. The fact that you're talking about now that like all of this is happening inside of his head. There is no literal bud that he's been going on this adventure with.
Yeah.
He is trying to face a truth about himself, the truth that he had attempted to take his own life, and that he was not happy with his current life. So I guess truths. I had not at all really thought about that. That's such a really important aspect of this ending.
A little bit of a throwback / I would say loose spoiler for A Space for the Unbound. But I think especially playing that game and comparing it to this one and some of the end narrative beats, that's what allowed me to make that connection.
Wow. Oh, yeah, you're right. They're
yeah.
like super thematically connected at that point.
Yeah. So I won't say it for anyone who hasn't played, but yeah, just that's all I'll say for that.
Yeah.
I don't know. What else were you thinking as this conversation was happening at the very closing of the game?
You know, for me, it was like a will life change? Like it was, I think it was pretty clearly communicated that this is essentially like a dream that is happening to
Right.
you as you're playing. And so one of the things that I was mostly curious about at this point, like accepting like the truth of the circumstance was obviously like a big moment. But I think for me, it was more so like, how can your life change after this?
Mm-hmm.
And that is the thing that like I left the game feeling a sense of hope at like at the end, like that you can discover these moments of joy, that it's important to discover these moments of joy.
Yeah.
And I like the thing that makes me discouraged, honestly, is just like, does the real world allow for it?
That's yep. Yeah, you hit the nail right on the head there. That's exactly what I was thinking as well, where I felt like Mr. Saitou does want to make those shifts. I feel like at the very least at the end of the game, you see him starting to make those shifts. And you see actually, I think, was it in the credits where you see that he actually has visited Brandon again and they're like sharing time with one another. So I think that's really cute. But you think about then he has to go back to work. He has to, he has to live in a society. So what happens when you're trying to make those changes in a system that does not allow for that a lot of the time?
And it's a total area of ignorance for me. Like I hear about like the salaryman lifestyle is kind of like a trope at this point. It's like, is it possible to have a job as a salaryman like this and still have these like access to connection points to joy, whatever the word is that you want to choose here. And I don't know anything enough about the culture to say that, but I know as like an American person working in a corporate world, like, God, it's tough. And they do everything they can to make you not feel like you have access to that.
Yeah. And that's when we go back to the idea of like, it's a muscle, right? And for better or worse, kind of worse, we have to learn how to increase our muscle strength. And like we joked about it, at the end of the last podcast, but it's true. We have to flex our muscle and increase our own capacity for protecting and helping ourselves with that, because the systems at play are not going to let us naturally. And this is where, again, maybe you can't do it by yourself, but when you have a community.
This is it. Quality. It's like the quality connection, right? Like it is so hard to have access and like make a big change like this when it's all just you and you're completely internal.
Right. Yeah. You can't do it by yourself. And that's when, like, small shout out for mutual aid. If you don't know about it, please look it up. It's the idea that you as a community have the tools, the resources, the knowledge, and the capability to help one another, and that you don't have to do the heavy lifting by yourself, and that you shouldn't do the heavy lifting by yourself on many, many levels. And I think this idea of quality community to ensure that you protect one another is super important, just on a real level moving into 2024.
Yeah, I think one of the things that definitely had me reflecting on at the end game is like, how am I going to try and be more intentional about quality connections with people? If it's like Jenny and I hanging out and not talking about the podcast, maybe that's one way. Or like hanging out with my D&D crew and not playing D&D, but playing as ourselves in real life with each other doing something. What? How the blasphemy. But I think like that was kind of one of the things that like in terms of like this we've played a lot of games that have been very emotionally impactful for me. This is one of the games that has been most like practically impactful for me, like actually asking me to reevaluate how I engage in the world.
I wanted to shout out one thing that I've read about recently, and it's the idea of like errand friends. And it's funny because I remember doing this, especially in college. And as an adult, it's kind of not happened. But instead of planning hangouts with friends where you're like, let's go grab coffee, let's go do a catch up, where it feels almost like a business. Like, you know, when you do catch ups for work, it almost feels like that. With your friends, instead, just being like, come with me to go do grocery shopping. Come with me to like just do these things that we do daily that we all need to do, but let's just do it together. And I thought that was like really cool because I remember doing that in college. It was just something we did. We were like, let's all pile in the car and go to Costco and like combine forces so we can get giant packs of Cheez-Its and stuff.
Absolutely.
Jumbo muffins. And I think that idea of bringing in quality connection by integrating it into your life daily and not making it a scheduled coffee catch-up, which I love coffee. I mean, I'll never say no. I thought that was a really cool thing to read, and I wanted to share that out as well.
That's brilliant. Actually, one of the things that you and I used to do when we did work together, it was like in the mornings, rather than going to like the standard coffee pot or like making coffee at home, we would just like go to Starbucks or whatever and like grab just like a black coffee. Yeah. And it was just like, or one of our local coffee shops when we had like time. But it was like, it was a routine. It wasn't like, oh, we're going out to grab coffee as like a special, unique thing. It was like, we are going to be getting coffee anyway.
Exactly.
We might as well go together. And it was just like, it was like a really nice routine to have. I guess that was kind of like an errand thing. Errand hang? What?
Yeah, I don't know I forget what it was actually called, but like an errand hang. I don't know.
Choreography.
Oh my God. I love it.
Yeah.
That's what we'll call it.
Choreography.
It's just, and it's something where it's like, because I know sometimes I also feel kind of self-conscious because when I'm trying to build relationships and community, I'm like, I know everyone's really busy. I don't want to impose. And I think for me also, just asking in the first place, I think in so many cases when you're trying to connect with people, for me at least, I get nervous and I don't ask because I'm like, I don't want to make them feel bad or inconvenience them in any way. And it's like, usually the other person is very excited that you asked. Yeah. So just asking in the first place. But yeah, also making it so that it is just kind of something you would both naturally do. And I don't know, it also provides like, you know, when you aren't sure what you want to talk about, but you have a thing to do. So it just allows you to have conversation, like you go back to grocery shopping just because that's a thing that you could easily do. And you don't have to have a agenda to talk about. You can just do grocery shopping. Yeah.
Can you believe the prices of fruit roll-ups right now?
Oh my gosh, the eggs this week. My goodness.
Dunkaroos are back.
Oh my God.
Shout out to Dunkaroos.
Yeah, shout out to Dunkaroos.
Yeah. Well, I think just general final thoughts on Mr. Saitou.
Again, just from a thematic perspective, I loved it. I think there's little details where I'm like, I wish we could have expanded on things a little bit more, but that's mostly because I wanted to be in the world longer and I wanted more stuff to talk about. So really, I think you put it really well, and I like the way you phrased how it is a really practical, in some ways, the most practical game we've played in terms of saying after playing, what can I actually do to make the change that I want to see versus just like feeling a lot of feelings. So I think that's really nice to feel like I want to do something rather than just like cry and be done with the game.
For those of us that don't have random 10-year-olds showing up in our hospital rooms to like whisk us away to a magical world, you got to find something.
Yeah, whatever works. What about you?
Yeah, I think for me, this idea of flexing joy, which you brought up in the interview, is like a really important one. And I think, honestly, we talked about this with Queer Man a bit, but like I'm a very routine-oriented person. And I think what I have been especially feeling over the last few months, and that this game has really helped me connect to, is like I have leaned into that too hard. And it's time to maybe get a bit more focused on some quality connections. So I think like I could say a million nice things about this game. I feel like I will continue to. Yeah. It's a great game, incredible experience, absolutely worth your time. We like highly recommend that you hop into it. But I think for me, the biggest takeaway is just that like it was a recognition or an opportunity of recognition for me that I needed to make some changes for how I'm engaging.
I love that. I think, again, the whole point of having these conversations is to learn a little bit more about ourselves and to like make those connections between how when we play games like this, it opens up the opportunity to make those connections. Like we talked with Laura about that too. So really cool stuff.
Really sorry, everyone, that we didn't make any Lost references or Evangelion references for this game. It's probably the first time.
Put that in the books of Geeks and Grounds history.
Yeah, apologies that you have to just like hear about like some real life practical implication things.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. No Evangelion or Lost. I'm in awe from that.
Oh, very nice.
There you go. So that's it for this deep dive. We hope you enjoyed it. Hope you got to take away some good learnings from it, some things that you would like to implement after listening to us and also playing the game. We will have our August selection up soon, so very excited for that. And if you haven't followed us on social media at Geeks and Grounds, we're on Twitter.
If Twitter still exists when this episode airs.
Yeah, but we're anywhere we are at Geeks and Grounds. And the best place to go is our website, because that's where you can sign up for the newsletter, get all the information there. And yeah. Take it away, Joel. Where can people find you?
Yes, you can find me at My Grand Falloon everywhere. And how about you, Jenny?
Folks can find me at Kimchica on Twitch, TikTok, and YouTube.
From all of us at Geeks and Grounds, if you're finding that your life or even just your cup of coffee is awful, maybe change it and make it full of awe.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. God, that was so deep.
Wow.
Make it awe-full.
Oh, I see what you did there. I see what you did. That was better.
Somehow.
Yeah. See you next time,
Bye, everyone.